Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thanks for checking out the podcast again this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. The People's Voice podcast is an investigative news podcast where I'm dedicated to covering stories and social issues that I feel are often overlooked and sometimes buried by social and mainstream media. The purpose of the podcast is to shed light on those important issues, and then I try to offer some insightful analysis, recommendations, and actionable solutions. The People's Voice podcast can be heard on all podcast platforms. We put out a new episode each and every Friday. And then we also put a video out on YouTube on a weekly basis as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. But in any event, we say welcome. Welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I wanted to get into the topic of a growing trend that some may be aware of, some of you may be experiencing it and practicing it now. But I want to kind of highlight this today for the podcast. And that's the growing trend of adults living alone. And this caught my attention for several reasons. Number one, I came across some study I was reading that was talking about the divorce rate in, at least in the United States. And one of the things that it pointed out was that the divorce rate in the United States has been decreasing, meaning that there are less people who are getting divorced today than in previous years, because especially if you are of a certain age, you always remember that the stat was, 50% of marriages don't work. So that's why, people, especially those who are anti-marriage, or sometimes present these, stats or say, there's a 50 chance that I'll stay married. So why not get married? But in any event, I came across that first. I was just, reading some information, and it shows that I'm reading a study here from the Institute for Family Studies. It says that as of today, the divorce rate is actually only 40% now. So basically you have a 60% chance, if you're married, of staying married, compared to the 1990s where it was close to 50%. So there has been a decline in the divorce rate, but that's also in correlation to the fact that less and less people are choosing to be married. So it's kind of like, it's going down. It's basically like those who are together are basically staying together, but there are no accelerated rates for new marriages, which is contributing to why the divorce rate is declining. But with that, reading that portion of that article, I then came across the trend of people living alone. And that number is continuing to increase, and not just for older adults, because, through life changes, divorces, and death of a spouse and sickness and things of that nature, older adults tend to end up living alone, right? And when I say older adults, I'm talking about, ages 65 years and older. But the trend now is showing that you have people in the age groups, especially in 20s and 30s. This would be, your Gen Zers and your probably later millennials who are choosing to live alone, which obviously is also contributing to where we're seeing declines in birth rates. And it's just a domino effect that goes on from there. I just talked a few weeks ago about the lower enrollment rate in public schools in the United States. And one of the contributing factors to that is, there are less babies being born. But that's a whole nother subject. But so the trend, what is going on? Let me talk about that a little bit. So Census, there was a census report that came out about 2 years ago, and it says that it showed over a quarter of all U.S. occupied households were one-person households, and this was up, and this was as of 2020, and that was up from 7.7% of households in 1940. So in 1940, you had less than 10% of households had single people. Now, as of 2020, and I'm sure the next census, when it comes out, this number will be even higher. It's saying well over a quarter, 25%, 27% of people now live in single one-person households. And I want to make sure that I make that distinction. This is one-person household. So this is not, I'm not talking about single parents, single mothers. I'm talking about people, individual adults who are living alone. And that, again, came out as of the last reporting, which was in 2020. In terms of what that looks like in terms of an age range, and they also highlighted this on the census.gov site where they talked about this. So again, in 1940, and for those who are watching the YouTube, you can kind of see the graph here, but in 1940, as I said, 7% of households had one person living in it. As those numbers have increased, and every year from 1940, the number of people living alone has increased. Up to 1980, and I'm just reading from the graph here, they used to just classify it as the total number of people. So there really wasn't an age breakdown. After 1990, they began to break down those numbers. And so on this graph, for those of you who are listening, in 1990, it shows that people between the ages of 15 to 64, there were about 15% of individuals in the United States living alone. And that number has steadily increased every year. Now, it dropped in 2020, and 2020 was the pandemic year. So I think that number might be skewed based on that, because there was a drop. So it went from 15% in 1990, and then in 2010, it was showing at 17%, but then it dropped in 2020 to 16.5. But in any event, the numbers are increasing. Why is it increasing though, right? Because it's one thing to say that, people are living alone and, there's a trend, but, there has to be a reason behind the trend. Well, one of the things that I found a couple of things in terms of, why this is occurring. I was reading a story here from an article from the Writers, which did a great article about 2 months ago. This was, 2 months ago. It's on the site. This was written by Julia Christa, who I thought did a great job. But in there, she notes several reasons why more people are living alone. And this is also a global phenomenon. This is not just, segregated to the United States, although based on the reading of the different reports, the increase in terms of the amount of adults living alone does skew higher in more Western societies, but it is a global phenomenon as well. But in her article, she noted, several different reasons for why this is occurring. Everything from the social, what she labels here, social and cultural shifts, what she says is one of the most significant drivers of the trend, is not only the evolving perception of selfhood and individual freedom, but the actualization of selfhood and individual freedom. Because a lot of these changes that are occurring in terms of the number of people living together has to do with greater access to technology, greater access to education, greater access to wealth. Because remember, many people, and even marriage itself, was one of the drivers behind it was economic security, especially when you start talking about women, especially women throughout the world, but here in the United States as well, to, at one point were pretty much designated as you're going to be born and become a wife or a mother, right? And that is no longer the trend. But in her article, she talks about solitude is no longer viewed solely as a social deficiency, but rather as an opportunity for self-discovery, reflection, and autonomy. She also goes on to talk about some of the economic independence, as I just mentioned. And she just reiterates what I just talked about, with more and more women entering the workforce and greater access to education. She says a growing number of people, particularly in urban centers, can afford the cost of single living, because, again, there is a cost to all living, but there's definitely a cost to single living. And she points out that this is one of the reasons, in terms of the factors of why people are choosing to live alone. Also, she says, although living alone can be more expensive per capita, many consider the trade-off of privacy, definitely, and control and freedom worth, paying that extra cost. Also, another reason for why people are living alone has to do with the changes in real estate as well. You have probably seen this, depending, where you live in the country and around the world, but definitely here in the United States, there is a tremendous amount of real estate being built for what I call single living. And that's everything from apartments that have all of these different amenities now, where basically you can just stay in the house and go downstairs and go across the street, and there's this restaurant, and there's a gym, and there's a rooftop, and there's inside the apartment complex, there's a game room and obviously a gym. Then they've got these, like, depending on what apartment complex you go into, but they've got like these work pods, and it's amazing. When I go into, some of these places, I'm like blown away just about how many amenities that they have already built into these living centers, which is also contributing to why people are choosing to live alone, because you now have all of the accessible needs right there in front of you, where you can kind of build community without having to necessarily, build a foundation or relationship with other people by living together, because you have access to so many different things. But there are so many different reasons for it, but this is just, some of the three that really stood out to me regarding that. There was also a video that I saw from the Student Psychologist, which is a YouTube channel where they look at various, obviously mental health and also relationships and social relationship issues. In there, they quoted a study that was done back in 2020, which was called The Single Reasons for Being Single. And they pointed out 4 reasons for that beyond just the 3 that I talked about. So let me play that from the Student Psychologist, so we can kind of add, some additional context to that. And then I'll talk a little bit about, what are the effects of this from a social and financial standpoint, and then we'll close out from there. But this is from the Student Psychologist.
Found. That long list of questions were essentially categorized into 4 separate domains. The first was low capacity for courtship, so it was kind of like insecurities. The second one was freedom. The third was constraints from a previous relationship. And the fourth was personal constraints. So for low capacity courtship, the 2 highest responses given were not good at flirting and I'm not a desirable mate. For the freedom domain, the main responses given were I want to be free to do whatever I want and I'm not the family type. For constraints from a previous relationship, it was I want to devote more attention to my children, and also I have not gotten over my previous relationship. And finally, for personal constraints, it was addiction and then sexual orientation. For more,
and so as she noted there, this was again from the study that was done back in 2020, which was called The Single Reasons for Being Single. And in that study, they talked to like 600 people. I believe 300 and change were women, 300 and change were men. And that's how they came out, with some of the reasons why people were choosing to live alone. I think important to point out was definitely the freedom part, as I said before, is definitely, one of the reasons why people are choosing to be alone, choosing to live alone, not be alone. But from a psychological standpoint, that first one, in terms of the insecurities that people have, and she mentioned some people feel like they're not desirable enough, that is also weighing heavily on why, especially younger adults, 20s and 30s, are living alone, because there's a great deal of insecurity that has arisen, especially was accelerated during the pandemic when so many had social isolation, and then coming out of that has been a very difficult thing for many younger people to navigate, which is contributing to the increase in terms of so many young adults and adults overall living alone. So I just want to point that out as well. In terms of just some of the other impacts that come from living alone, there are it's in anything in life. There's always some benefits, and there's also always some bad results as well. Well, I should say challenges. In that same article from the writers, it was pointed out in terms of the psychological impacts and benefits and challenges. Number one, it says solitude can offer numerous psychological benefits. It's been reported that many who live alone report an increased focus, reduced stress from domestic conflicts, and a greater sense of agency. But it also says, however, the choice to live alone comes with some emotional challenges as well. Loneliness, while distinct from solitude, can become a serious issue. And there's a ton of data that shows that not only can loneliness, not living alone, loneliness lead to, mental issues and just cognitive decline, but it can also create serious health concerns as well, especially because you don't have that accountability piece that you sometimes get when you live with other people. But it goes on to say, to combat these risks, those who live alone are often encouraged to maintain strong social networks. And that is beyond your phone. Get off your phone and get out into the public, get out into the community, interact with people. There are so many different groups now that you can join, meetups and things of that nature, where you can just kind of have that connection to another person, because it's very important. In addition, it says some governments and nonprofits are also implementing policies to support solo dwellers, such as neighborhood watch programs, mental health services, and community centers as well. But this is a growing trend. This is not just something that is a flash in a pan. And with all of the conveniences that now come with living, everything from food delivery services to, delivery from, Amazon and other retailers where you don't even have to leave the house, solo living is going to be increasing. But it's important that for those who are living alone, that you're taking the necessary steps to make sure that you stay socially plugged in, to avoid creating additional health issues, and that's mental and physical as well. So, but that's what I wanted to talk about today. Like I said, I came across this study or these studies, and I thought this was very interesting. So I want to kind of bring it to the audience. But if you have a comment and you want to follow up, you can reach me at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. You could also reach me at I am Trey Evans on YouTube. When I post a video, please feel free to leave a comment. All comments are welcome. But that is my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.